My sister betrayed me with my long-term boyfriend and's now pregnant with his child. Now, my family's siding with her, forcing me out of my room to make it a nursery, and compelling me to support her and her child. To be honest, expressing my sadness is insufficient. Because of how difficult the past year has been, I've almost entirely lost interest in relationships. I feel like everything in my life has been knocking the wind out of me one after another. And now I'm at a place where I'm really reconsidering everything. Here's a brief summary of what happened to get me to this breaking point. It all began during my freshman year of university. At a neighborhood pub one night, I ran into a guy named Austin. We clicked right away, and things really took off after that. I had no idea, though, that this was only the start of an exciting adventure. We started hanging out and truly clicked once we bonded with Austin. After spending a good amount of time together, things became really serious. My parents have always been quite traditional and severe, so I was really nervous to introduce anyone I dated to them. Usually, I would just ignore the thought of it altogether since it would make me quite anxious. Nevertheless, I thought it was time to finally introduce Austin to my family after we had been dating for almost 4 years. I can't help but feel that was one of the worst decisions I've ever made when I look back. My family fell in love with him the moment I introduced him. I mean, they truly did. I was unaware at the time that this applied to Jessica, my sister, and not simply in a brotherly sense. To be honest, it went beyond that. The fact that Jessica kept her feelings hidden for 4 years shows how cunningly she managed her emotions. I had no idea what was simmering beneath the surface at that period when everything appeared to be normal. I've been taken aback by the entire thing, and in retrospect there were indications that, as my connection with Austin developed, I should have recognized sooner. He became, in a sense, the son that my parents never had. Austin was completely committed to this job, and to be honest, I was astounded by how much my parents seemed to alter in his presence. It seemed as though his presence eased their concerns about my sister and me, as if they were happy that a man was now watching out for us. Thinking about it now, that seems so archaic. I nearly cringe. It seems quite sexist to think that they were more comfortable because a male figure was watching out for us. However, that was the actual situation. It was as though having Austin around made us more acceptable in their eyes, which is an odd and unsettling reality to admit at this point. In fact, my parents began going to Austin for counsel on matters pertaining to my sister as well as myself. You know, Jessica had a period in college when she was something of a party girl. My folks were a little concerned about her since she seemed to be living it up. Uncertain about how to respond, they curiously began asking Austin for advice on how to address Jessica's actions. It was odd how much they trusted him. It was as though he had evolved into our family's unofficial advisor. When Jessica entered college, her perfect life, a straight-A student, intensely religious like our parents, and very involved in extracurricular activities, began to shift. She started to see more of the world, which was a significant change from her way of life before. This adjustment really concerned my parents. Since she was their little princess, they were extremely worried that her new social life was out of control. Their worry most likely set the stage for what transpired next. When Jessica and our parents got into a fight, it was generally about her newfound freedom and way of life, so they called Austin to help settle the dispute. They regarded him as a steady, reassuring presence and had faith in him. Due of this, Austin and Jessica were able to spend more time together and grew closer, similar to when he'd take her out to lunch to get some fresh air. Following these disputes, I genuinely thought this was excellent at the time. The fact that Austin and Jessica got along so well pleased and reassured me. I was relieved that Austin didn't have any problems with Jessica, unlike other people who deal with challenging in-laws, and I valued his presence in helping to diffuse the situation. I had no idea that their bond was developing into something more than that of a brother and sister. I felt doubly luckier to have Austin because it seemed like he was being a nice mediator and supportive partner. I had no idea that there was more going on behind the scenes than I ever realized. We kept up our relationship for the next 4 years. However, things started to become a little weird. By the time we reached our 8th anniversary, Jessica was becoming abnormally involved in my connection with Austin, and I started to notice this. She began attending our outings without invitation and interjecting herself into conversations that were supposed to be between Austin and me alone. Her presence became a source of contention. She appeared to be inciting conflict, and it appeared to be working. My relationship with Austin became so tense that we would eventually have long stretches of silence. He didn't appear to care that there was a growing gap between us and didn't try to reach out and close it. It was a very difficult year. And in retrospect, I see that I probably ought to have called it quits right there. Naturally, though, I didn't. Our problems only got worse as I tried to save our relationship despite all the warning signs. Our disagreements increased in frequency and venom. Then, a week after our 7th anniversary, Austin and Jessica wanted to speak with me in depth. This was no ordinary discussion. It was obvious from the way they approached me that a big revelation was about to happen. My heart fell as I sat there and listened to them strike up a discussion. I knew deep down that this was bad. However, a small part of me held on to the hope that it wouldn't be as horrible as I had thought. They detonated the next. Jessica was expecting a child and Austin might be the father. My thoughts raced. It seemed like a terrible joke of some kind. This can't be genuine, I promise. I think my quiet was a mixture of shock and beseeching them to admit they were joking. However, the gravity of their reactions validated my worst suspicions. This was no place for levity, just the hard facts. And just when I believed that things could not get worse. After the kid was born, Austin stated that he planned to help Jessica and the child until a DNA test could determine who is the biological father. It seemed like my heart was breaking apart to hear those words. The pain was overwhelming, a trifecta of astonishment, betrayal, and deep sadness. I clung to the hope that at least my family and friends would be there for me in that moment, despite the chaos whirling inside of me. They had always been my pillar of support, and just now, more than ever, I needed them to guide me through this incredible predicament. I clung to the hope that those closest to me would support me throughout this terrible period, because the idea of dealing with this alone was intolerable. I was unprepared for the stomach punch I received from that phone chat with my parents. There I was, crying all over my face and hardly able to hold myself together. I was expecting the two people who had always supported me to at least lend me a sympathetic ear. Rather than offering solace, their voices were brimming with enthusiasm and delight for Jessica's pregnancy and the possibility of having their first grandchild. It was intolerable how excited they sounded, especially considering that Austin, my boyfriend, might be the father. It felt betrayed to hear my folks excited about the scenario. My world was falling apart while they were having fun. It was too much to take that they were happy, not just okay, that Austin might be my sister's child's father. I was beyond words sad and felt completely alone. In the months that followed, I never even got around to ending our relationship. I simply became numb and withdrew within myself. Day by day, I observed Austin adopting the role of my sister's supporting partner. In my own life, I felt eerily familiar. Unable to process the bizarre truth that my lover was getting ready to maybe become my niece or nephew's father, I remained silent and invisible. This period of quiet and numbness persisted until approximately 1 month prior to Jessica's due date. That was the turning point for everything that had been growing inside of me. The circumstances had worn me down, and I came to the conclusion that I couldn't carry on with my pain and suspended disbelief. It was time to face the music, to confront the feelings I'd been holding inside, and to cope with the relationships that were irrevocably changed. Then Jessica, whose house I pay for, fairly bluntly insisted that I turn one of the rooms into a nursery. I felt like something broke inside of me. This went beyond simple overreach. It seemed like a total takeover of my money and personal space. The ensuing fight was the first meaningful exchange we had had about the whole thing, and it allowed for even more ridiculous demands. They started pressuring me to pay for the nursery setup and even the cost of a babysitter, on top of their expectation that I give up a room in my own home. Even though Jessica had failed 5 classes in the past, she was still planning to return to college, and it was astounding how outrageous these demands were. It seemed like they were just testing my limits with every new request. I was inundated with irrational demands, one after the other. I started to realize that perhaps it was time to give severing relations with these people some serious thought. However, Each time I asked people close to me for guidance, I received backlash that made me doubt my emotions. They advised me to accept the fact that mistakes are inevitable, and that, should Austin and I be able to patch things up, he would make a fantastic father to my future offspring. I felt even more confused and alone after reading this. On the one hand, I felt like I was being urged to accept and forgive something that was obviously wrong. However, my personal feelings and sense of betrayal were screaming at me to stop. Between my own collapsing sense of self and society standards, I felt lost and heartbroken. There was tremendous pressure to do what other people thought was right. However, I was resisting with all of my might, desperate to find a way out of the emotional devastation that had taken over my life. Here, what should I do? I will provide an update. Everything was completely turned upside down again today when Jessica gave birth. She wanted me to stay with her in the labor room, so I ended up being the one to drive her to the hospital. To be really honest, I thought she was doing this as a kind of revenge to make me feel bad about the whole mess between us. I couldn't bring myself to abandon her in such a vulnerable position, though, in spite of everything. Regardless of our problems, that didn't sit well with me. To make matters more complicated, when I phoned my parents to let them know about Jessica's labor, Austin and my dad were out of town on a vacation doing some tracking. Their response was a little lackluster. Not at all, thank you. Just a heads up that they would be back shortly. With the emotional weight of the day, it stung a little that it felt like just another day to them. For myself, when I finally called Austin's parents to give them an update, I was completely taken aback by how they responded. Jessica's pregnancy was unknown to them, let alone the possibility that Austin was the father. Their response was not what I had anticipated. In sharp contrast to my own family, they appeared to be unhappy with Austin and determined to hold him responsible. Since then, nothing else has happened, but I'm getting ready for my folks' return from Austin. It will be a big confrontation, and I'm not sure how it will play out. I'll make sure to update you on the progress of everything. After this major disruption, we determine our respective positions after they have all returned. Current information as of right now. After Jessica had birth, things became even worse. Her friends intervened right away to assist in caring for her and the infant. Sincerely needing a break from the intense stress and feeling like my presence wasn't as necessary, I made the decision to go. Although I didn't spend much time with the infant, I quickly learned of the drama that started when I departed, via a few pals that Jessica and I have in common. It seems that when Austin and my parents came to visit the baby, things became crazy at the hospital. There was a lot of emotional outpouring and a fair amount of confrontation based on the incomplete data I was given. The advent of the baby seems to have brought a lot of long-buried tensions to the surface. Things quickly heated up since there were many complex emotions there, and the emotions were intense, the way I was told about it. The hospital scenario was one for the record books. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, my parents entered the hospital, ecstatic to finally see their new grandchild. But their elation soon gave way to shock. It wasn't just any shock, though. It was the type you could feel in your bones, the kind that instantly altered all you believed to be true. My folks were taken aback. However, Austin appeared to be going through each phase of mourning in a matter of minutes. The air simply changed as the three of them stood there gazing at an African-American baby. Austin, oh, he went utterly crazy. Right there in the hospital, he lost it. A full-blown, unrestrained outburst of anger. The situation became so severe that he had to be escorted out by hospital security. That's how unhinged he was. And here I was, agreeing to have a conversation with Austin before any of this mayhem occurred. He had called me, wanting to talk, and seemed quite serious. Unaware of his hospitalization, he replied in the affirmative. With this background information, meeting him in person feels almost, hilariously funny. There's little doubt that this will be an interesting encounter. I'll be sure to update you on the outcome. 3 updates. Hello to all of you. It seemed like I was closing a long, turbulent chapter of my life when I met Austin today. We got together at the neighborhood eatery, where we went on our first date. A place that was once filled with a lot of happy memories. But when I saw him there, looking very sad, I realized I had no sympathy at all. Not regret, nor pity, nothing. I saw that as a sign that Austin was no longer my thing. But I realized that in order for me to make any real progress, we had to have this talk. I took a seat, and he was even more charming than before. He spoke to me like we were old friends, catching up as though he hadn't completely upended my life. In an attempt to ease into the conversation, he inquired about my life. Then the conversation turned to how the issue with Jessica's pregnancy had affected him, and he started talking about it all in an embarrassing way. He described how his own parents disowned him in response to the shock of meeting his child, who was a child of a different race than he had anticipated. He opened up to everyone about his problems one by one, and so forth. The entire drama and aftermath during it all. I just paid attention. This has nothing to do with rekindling. It had to do with coming to an end. It was about giving him the benefit of the doubt and letting go, realizing that this chapter of my life was really gone. For me, it was a critical step to declare that I'm prepared to move on from everything and start over. Ending things isn't the only way to get closure. It's about making things ready for fresh starts. I feel like I'm ready to accomplish that right now. It was less about comforting Austin after hearing him out, and more about seeing the full scope of the fallout from his actions. As he talked, it became evident that I was not going to provide him with the emotional support or validation that he so sorely needed. It appeared like he was expecting some kind of sympathy from me. He eventually appeared to realize this, and in an apparent moment of sincere regret, he apologized and sobbed. He acknowledged that his involvement with Jessica was the worst decision he had ever made. However, the disclosures did not end there. Then he revealed to me that not only was he not Jessica's biological father, but he had also gotten an STD from her. He was deeply affected by the extent of his losses. He was disowned by his parents. It came out that the child he believed to be his was not, and it permanently ruined our relationship. Still, I had no sympathy for him in spite of everything. It was a painful reality that his choices had brought him to this place. He needed to confront. I told him quietly that he would have to leave the house we used to live in as well. Even though he seemed surprised by this news, considering everything that had happened, it was to be expected, after presenting the information. I broke up with him, walked out of the restaurant, and blocked him everywhere. For me, it was a time of liberation. I'm finally closing this tumultuous chapter of my life and moving on. Even though it was challenging, I had to have this meeting in order to genuinely start over and move on from the past. I have also blocked my parents, who would not stop apologizing on my phone and weighing me down with their drama and betrayal for so long. Regarding Jessica, I suppose they're now looking for her biological father. All I'm waiting for is Austin to move out of the house we currently reside in so that, quite honestly, I can start over. That's all I have to share with you people. I appreciate your help and your strong love. It has great meaning for me. Now for the first NTA top comment. It amazes me that you feel the need to inquire about this, and it shocks me even more that you say you get along well with your sister. None of the things you're describing, based on what I've read, indicate that your relationship is strong and healthy. You should, in my opinion, get away from these folks as quickly as possible. 2 NTA. However, why are you even thinking of parting ways with these people? That's what I would do first if I were in your position. Second tale. Hello, my name is Oceana and I'm 26 years old. James, who is 27 years old, and I have been married for a few years now. I adore my name very much. I think it's quite cool that it's distinct and stands out. But something has been bothering me about my in-laws for a while now. They refer to me as Anna constantly. It seems as though they have chosen to exclude the majority of my name and simply use what they are more accustomed to. They always introduce me as Anna when we meet new people, or when they talk about me to other people. When I introduce myself, they even try to convince me to use Anna, which feels really strange because that's not my name. Although he has repeatedly told them that I go by Oceana and that they should use my full name, James, my husband, has been incredibly supportive. However, his parents ignore him, claiming that giving someone a nickname is a sign of affection. But James didn't give up. During a recent family dinner, he made it very evident that my name is Oceana, not Anna. Then, during that supper, something occurred that sort of escalated this problem. Because he knows me from his dad, James's nephew said he informed one of his buddies about me and used my complete name. However, his mother, my sister-in-law, corrected him and advised him to address me as Anna, as they do. I feel like they're not honoring my preference, which has been kind of irritating. All I want is to be called by my real name, which I adore and think best describes who I am. You know, it's a little thing, but it's also a significant thing because your name plays a big role in who you are. Thus, I'm not wavering on this one. I'm hoping they'll pick up on it quickly. Things definitely got out of hand after that dinner. I broke when my husband's sister urged her son's friend to call me Anna rather than Oceana. I questioned them about it after waiting for the kids to leave so no one could overhear. They kept refusing to use my real name, so I told them up front how tired and disrespectful I felt, the one I have consistently used, just because it wasn't to their liking. I called attention to its unfairness. They shouldn't feel entitled to do so to me, since they wouldn't like it if I started arbitrarily shortening or changing their names without their permission. At that point, my mother-in-law made a pretty hurtful remark. She claimed that their names are authentic and typical, in contrast to mine, which she thought was a strange hippie name. It felt awkward to bring up that. She remarked it was absurd that a mature woman would choose a name like that. Her remarks were quite powerful. It seemed to be more than a simple inclination toward a moniker. That amounted to a criticism of my identity and the decisions my parents made when naming me. This was obviously not just a case of miscommunication. It was a fundamental disdain for my identity and for my sentiments. This discussion made clear how different my in-laws' ideals and appreciation of individuality were from mine. My name, Oceana, is the main factor in the situation my husband and I had with his family. I truly enjoy my name, but my in-laws have decided that Anna is a better name, and I don't like it. They think my real name is strange and don't hesitate to call it out. Things became heated after I told them I preferred to be called Oceana, so my husband and I just left the event. However, his entire family, aside from the children, is now rather angry with me. They believe that because my name is unusual, I should be more understanding, and that I was impolite. It's great that my spouse fully supports me. However, I acknowledge that Anna is just a shortened form of my name, and that they had plenty of other options. I was still hurting. They called me Oceana for a while, then changed it without asking my permission. I'm beginning to question whether or not I was being overly sensitive about the entire situation. It's difficult because our names play a significant role in who we are, and it hurts deeply when someone disregards that. However, I'm also questioning my actions and wondering if I should have let it pass. Everyone has an opinion about what constitutes normalcy, so maybe I should be more laid back about it. But the fact that they won't call me by my true name bothers me deeply. I try, especially since it's my favorite name, and I think it perfectly describes me. Next up, NTA's top comment. Depending on how submissive you are, call each of them by a random name or entirely ignore them when they refer to you as Anna. Even better if they find the name offensive. You go by your name. Whether they like it or not is irrelevant. They can use whatever you like, but it's your distinguishing noise. NTA. Your name is lovely and distinctive. I apologize for your in-laws' extreme disrespect. I commend you for your patience, and I believe you should keep correcting them firmly until they see how ridiculous their actions are. Story #3. I'm a 31-year-old adoptive woman. Growing up, I had the best sister 35 and my parents are amazing. I never saw the point in getting to know my birth mother or any of my other biological family members because to me, they are my family. I received a Facebook message from someone claiming to be my half-sister 3 years ago. I chose to ignore it and hoped she would go on because she was approximately 16 at the time, and I wasn't in a position to initiate conversation. However, she didn't. Rather than that, in the middle of the night, she sent me 3 more texts. A few weeks after sending the first message, I replied wishing her and her family all the best and not looking to connect. I then blocked her. After several months, still another account. 1 more of her children. Even yet, I think it was the same girl who reached out once again. Last year, I adjusted my settings to allow for Instagram direct messages. Then I saw several messages posted from 4 profiles on Instagram. It was more obvious that all 4 of my biological mother's children were attempting to connect, even if some were still very small. One of them, the same girl who had gotten in touch with me, said they had always wanted a big sister and that they wanted to get to know me even if their mother didn't. Since she was the oldest and at that point legally an adult, I replied to her, telling her to kindly leave me alone and that I was not interested in talking to her. When they arrived at my door a few weeks ago, the oldest one explained that they had paid for someone to find me, acting as though this would make me want to provide them further access. I wasn't content. They kept attempting to get me to let them inside, but I ordered them to leave at least twice before closing the door and phoning the police. When they stayed put, during all of this, my sister was attempting to go in, and they were being disrespectful to her. When the police arrived, they were led off my land. My 2 adopted cousins took offense at what I did, and the entire event was discussed in our family. They told me that turning them away was terrible, and that I should get to know them since making a connection with one's birth family is incredibly fulfilling, and they will always be there. I assured them that my loved ones, with whom I grew up, would always be there. They stated that I shouldn't have been so hard on them because some of them are still minors and they had been trying for years. For now, ETA on the comments, NTA, you are not required to establish a connection with these enigmatic family members, with whom you have no other relationship save blood. You did not grow up with them. They were trespassing on your property in your opinion. When someone is trespassing and won't leave, you have the police take them away. It's really fulfilling to reconnect with the birth family, but there will always be others who say, "Oh, please save that BS." That is based on a dice roll. Of course, they may all be awful, or they could all be wonderful individuals. It's okay that you don't seem to be in a position where you would want to roll the dice. You shouldn't be forced to do anything by anyone. Your cousins are 8 inches for that tacky line, and for attempting to engage in interpersonal relationships, whereas your biological siblings are masters at pushing. You're not inclined to. You are not required to know anything about these persons when you declined. They persisted in their efforts. They are not allowed to follow you. I recognize that family consists of the individuals who brought you up, as well as the people you grew up with. Countless years are invested in those connections. You just cannot be claimed by someone based solely on DNA. Not in this manner. You are obviously not in the right frame of mind for family members who are unaware. Furthermore, others can view you poorly because you have nothing at all to offer them. That is not your deal. That is theirs. You made it obvious that you didn't want to know them, and you completed the necessary actions. They found your address, which is as dubious as an F, and showed up without warning, infringing upon your preferences and privacy. That sounds insane to me, and it seems like they have no limits at all. They shouldn't be allowed to essentially hire someone to pursue you and invade your space when it's clear that's not what you wanted, even if they're young. The oldest in especially seemed to think this was okay, which is mind-boggling. Even if you might have the same DNA, you owe them nothing in terms of a connection. Story 2. My father is dying and he disowned my sister. How do I get her to give him up? It was one of those typical Saturdays in 2003, with nothing looking out of place. The only sound coming from the TV in the living room, where Dad was sorting through some old mail that had piled up, was the occasional giggle. We had no idea that the pile contained a ticking time that would soon destroy our family. Dad was the type of guy who liked to keep things tidy, making a weekend effort to get rid of old invoices and trash mail. However, he discovered something rather different that day. An envelope that wasn't just any old letter from a buddy or a bill. A sequence of love letters and hotel bills that pointed to one certain truth. Not just with anyone, but with John, his boyhood best friend too. Mom was having an affair. Since elementary school, John and Dad have shared everything, from baseball cards to life's most significant events, and have never been apart. John was not just a companion. Dad never had a brother like him. At my parents' wedding, he was even the best man, joyfully supporting Dad while he swore to love Mom regardless of the circumstances. Now exposed in the most brutal way imaginable was the irony of those pledges. When Dad initially came across the receipts amid the messages of affection, he sat there stunned. As he attempted to piece together the chronology, the covert meetings, and the betrayal by the 2 individuals he trusted the most, his hands trembled. It was as if someone had given him a slap in the face and then reached into the most private area of his heart to rip it out. That day, I was working on a school project in my room at home, completely unaware of the storm that was building downstairs. I didn't go down to investigate until I heard a loud thud. Dad was seated on the ground, with letters and receipts all over him. His expression was one of agony. "Dad, what's wrong?" Kneeling next to him and attempting to make sense of the jumbled papers, I inquired. At first, he only shook his head, like attempting to wake up from a bad dream, without responding. It was not a dream, though. He spoke shakily but was able to express his anguish. "It's John and your mother. They have been dating for some time. Examine this." With a hotel receipt from just last week in his palm, he said. The space became quiet. His comments were weighing heavily on both of us. I was at a loss for words or actions. Memories of Mom and John and their flirtatious moments together flashed across my thoughts. They were laughing a little too much. Now everything made twisted sense. Dad took an hour to go over what he had discovered, detail by detail. His tone became increasingly resignation, as if he was accepting his broken world. He was the one who was powerful all along, the problem solver, the cornerstone of our household. It was unprepared for me to see him like this, broken and defeated. The next few days were a haze of whispered phone calls and private discussions. Mom initially denied everything when Dad confronted her, but the proof was too strong to ignore. At last, she acknowledged the affair. Her apology were weak and her remarks empty. She said, "I just fell out of love and John was there." Her voice was colder than it had been. "I apologize for forcing you to learn this way. Apologies." The phrase reverberated throughout the home, making fun of the years that Dad had dedicated to our family and his selfless love. He pleaded with her to think again, to seek therapy, to attempt to put things right. However, it was already too late. Mom had decided on something. She was going to John without him. The information went viral, every child responding differently. Disbelief, fury, sorrow. Everything combined to create a violent storm that had the potential to split our family even further. My twin sister Sarah was the most affected. She was always her father's favorite since she was perfect. But during the next few weeks her attitude shifted. She became aloof. She doesn't go home as much. Her talks with her father were uncomfortable and tense. She seemed to be blaming him for not being sufficient or for not making her mother happy. However, I was aware that it was not that simple. It was about her life being uprooted and her loyalty being put to the test. John and Mom cohabitated shortly after the divorce decree was submitted. It was swift, almost merciless. After they moved into a posh neighborhood, Mom seemed to have a completely new existence that didn't seem to include us until it was convenient. Dad, on the other hand, made an effort to maintain our normalcy. Although it was clear that he was under stress, he went down in weight. His eyes lost brightness and he started to grin less frequently. In retrospect, I see that day as the beginning of the end for a lot of things, including trust, family harmony, and the innocence that previously infused our everyday existence. There was more to Dad's discovery than adultery. It was the disintegration of our family's fabric, until we were just people, unable to comprehend how the warmth and love we had previously experienced had transformed into a harsh, cold betrayal. Thread by thread, seeing my father attempt to start over, his soul was shattered but unbroken. Although I gained knowledge about the human heart's resiliency, the wounds served as a continual reminder of the day our family's life was irrevocably altered. Even though all of us were still living there, the house felt different, emptier somehow, after the storm that was Mom's departure. Dad tried his best to maintain order, but it was obvious he was merely going through the motions. His heart was no longer in it. And who was to blame for him? His wife and best friend had completely upended his world. My twin sister Sarah, who had always been my dad's little girl, was in the midst of all this mayhem. You would think that after something like this she would be by his side, but that's not how things ended up. Rather, it was like seeing someone switch sides in slow motion as Sarah became more and more distant from Dad and, over time, closer to Mom and John. We were all shocked to learn that Sarah had moved out and decided to reside with her mother. Yes, she was a self-governing 27-year-old, but this was something else entirely. It was like being betrayed over and again. Dad did his best to conceal his disappointment, but it was difficult to ignore the hurt in his eyes. After losing his wife, he was now experiencing the feeling of losing his daughter as well. Our family's entire dynamic changed. Weekends that were once lively and boisterous turned unpleasant and uncomfortable. When Sarah would visit, It was obvious that she was merely going through the motions and was sure that everything was awkward and that there were long pauses in between laughs. She didn't know where to stand or what to say, like if she were a stranger in her own house. Sarah's announcement that she was considering changing her job path from as early as I can recall made things even more confusing. Like her father, she had wished to become a doctor. She had always stated that she wanted to become a surgeon like her father, but all of a sudden she was discussing attending law school. Not even a genius could have guessed that Mom and John were responsible for this. Both of them seemed to have their own plans for her, and they were both lawyers. Dad was devastated. Losing his wife to his closest friend was one thing, but losing his daughter's dreams to that was an entirely different type of agony. He attempted to comprehend her decision by having a conversation with her about it. Sarah, though, was determined. She would tell me that it's just something I had to do for myself. Her statements, though, seemed phony. This obviously wasn't about her alone. John started to guide her constantly and became a mainstay in her life, promising her a job at his firm after she graduates and even helping her with her law school applications. He seemed to be preparing her to replace him by removing the aspects of her that made him think of his father. It was difficult to see how Sarah had changed. She started to resemble her mother more, undoubtedly ambitious but also cold-blooded and cunning. She seemed to lose the warmth that had once defined her and become a detached, unfitting professional. Despite all of his heartbreak, Dad never gave up on attempting to get in touch with her. Despite his own misgivings, he encouraged her to pursue her goal of attending law school. He was beaming with pride as he attended her graduation. She would be joining John's company, not some esteemed hospital, despite this. The gap widened with each year that went by. The holidays were particularly difficult. Though Sarah would occasionally appear, she was always eager to get away and return to her new life with Mom and John. We didn't feel like her family. Rather, we felt like checks on her list of duties. And Dad wasn't the only one who noticed the change. And so did the rest of us. It was difficult, but we made an effort to sympathize and offer assistance. We missed our sister, the one who would sneak out to the movies with us and speak for hours about everything and everything. That Sarah was no longer there, and that someone we hardly recognized took her place. The changes in oneself wasn't the only thing that hurt. It was the sense of unfairness, of witnessing someone you care about pick the people who had hurt her the most out of the relatives who had supported her entire life. Each time you visit, each coerced discussion served as a constant reminder of what was lost. Dad's health started to deteriorate, a combination of heartbreak, stress, and maybe just the burden of caring too much for too long. I saw him attempt to balance the picture of the daughter he had raised with the adult Sarah. He cherished her still. That was evident. However, there was now a resignation and melancholy in his affection that indicated things had irreversibly changed. In retrospect, those were the years when our close-knit family slowly fell apart. Each of us was handling the consequences in a different manner. For Dad, however, the treachery was a double-edged sword that sliced deeply and left scars that seemed to take forever to heal. Not only did Sarah's change of heart affect her connection with her father, her relationship with every one of us was altered by it. We were spectators to her metamorphosis, observers of a change that none of us had chosen but that we all had to embrace. It was an unpleasant revelation, realizing that sometimes you just have to let go, no matter how much you want to cling on. Yes, we did. We're all adjusting to the new normal in our own unique ways while clinging to the notion that perhaps, just possibly, things will get better eventually. But as the days went by, the reality of our broken family cast a greater and greater shadow over that hope. We thought that 2017 would be a nice year, a new beginning. Despite all the tension-filled undertones, there was a buzz of excitement surrounding Sarah's wedding. Dad was resolved to make the most out of it, ever the optimist. He had always anticipated seeing Sarah in her wedding gown, escorting her down the aisle and wishing her luck in her new happy life. It was meant to be one of those pivotal times, a glimmer of hope amid the disorganized fallout from our family breakup. Sarah had always understood that her father valued this greatly. All of us did. Dad gave her a blank check for the wedding as a result. Money was not the only factor. It was an indication. It was his way of telling her that he would always be there for her. He spoke about it all the time. Whenever we saw weddings on television or went to one as guests, "Sarah, when it's your turn," he would say it will be flawless. Throughout the months-long planning process, Dad was involved at every stage. Even though they didn't get along, he never allowed it stop him from trying to be there for Sarah because of his affections for Mom and John. He showed up to every dress fitting and tasting, always full of energy, always supportive. But then everything fell apart, literally the day before the wedding. Almost too casually, Sarah broke the news at what we took to be a last routine check-in. She looked through her planner and remarked, "Oh, by the way, I decided that John and Dad are both going to walk me down the aisle." Not even raising an eyebrow. The space became silent. Dad's face was practically met with a collective heart drop. It is something I will always remember. He felt as though someone had struck him in the stomach. One could feel the pain engraved deeply within his face. Both of us. Why? Despite the steadiness in his voice, there was a tremor of suppressed emotion. When Sarah did look up, her gaze flitted between her father and me, as though she wasn't sure how much to reveal. John has also played a significant role in my life. It feels good, to have both of you there. Dad was obviously having trouble processing it all to get her point of view. But I always thought Sarah, his voice faltered, leaving the statement unresolved, the dream not realized. We had never seen an argument like the one that ensued in our family. Dad, who was always the one to mediate disputes and steer clear of conflict, was unable to contain his anguish and disappointment. Everything spilled out of him in a barrage of words that didn't seem natural. "After everything, after what they did, you want him to be there." Dad's voice got louder, an uncommon event that demonstrated the depth of his emotions. Sarah was combative, her remarks incisive and savage. "John is also my family's father. He has supported me in ways that you haven't lately." That hurt. It was nearly unbearable to watch Dad's face fall apart at her remarks. The altercation got more intense. Raised voices, cutting through the flimsy facade of familial ties with stern words hurled like knives. Dad ultimately failed to make the cut. It was too hard to bear to stand next to John, the guy who had contributed to the breakdown of his family and marriage, while grinning for the cameras. His voice cracked as he replied, "If that's your decision, Sarah, then I can't be a part of this." Sarah attempted to call his bluff in the hopes that he would give in. Dad, though, was adamant. He was not present during the nuptials. Rather, he remained at home by himself, bearing his grief in loneliness and silence as Sarah walked down the aisle accompanied by John. That choice had enormous consequences. Our already fragile family became much more shattered. The relationship between Dad and Sarah, which had previously been the source of his happiness, vanished completely. Many family members supported their father, believing that Sarah's choice was the ultimate betrayal not just of her father, but also of all the ideals we believed to be common. Sarah tried to patch things up with Dad multiple times after the wedding, but he was finished. His once open and tolerant heart had become stony. Instead of being a priceless memento, the wedding pictures came to represent what was lost. They displayed a radiant Sarah, looking stunning in her gown, but John was standing next to her, grinning widely as though he didn't care. The ensuing years were difficult. Dad responded to Sarah's attempts at reconciliation with icy indifference. Holidays, family get-togethers, and births. Either she was not there, or when she was treated with a cold civility that was far worse than open hostility. The pain and hurt from the wedding day lingered even as Dad's health started to deteriorate. The man who was once the center of our family and the life of parties had turned into a shadow of his former self. The lingering pain cast a shadow over his happiness. And as I observed everything happen, I pondered whether Sarah and Dad would ever be able to move past their past decisions, or if some wounds were too severe to ever completely heal. Earlier this year, Dad's health began to rapidly deteriorate, and with it, any chance of mending fences with Sarah appeared to vanish. To the man who was larger than life a moment ago. He was no longer the same person who was always the first to laugh or offer consolation. Dad was suffering from pancreatic cancer, which is an extremely deadly disease. One of the most difficult things our family has ever had to go through was probably watching him struggle through treatment after treatment with no genuine chance of recovery. Sarah's attempts to rekindle her relationship felt desperate and, to some of us, a little false during this whole ordeal. Perhaps that isn't fair. It was probably too little, too late for Dad, but she did have regrets. And maybe she was being sincere when she reached out. The pain she felt from picking John over him at the wedding was too great. That was a closed chapter in his life, and no amount of begging or Sarah's excuses could bring it back open. Why this time? Dad would sigh every time her name was mentioned. That's all she's feeling is guilt. It has nothing to do with me. It's all about her absolving herself. Perhaps he was correct. Or perhaps it was how he dealt with the hurt. In any case, he refused to let her see him, not even when she proposed to visit and try to mend things, to be a part of his life once more. There was a noticeable strain this caused in our family. Some family members believed her father ought to pardon her for allowing her last days to be marred by old grudges. She's still your daughter. They'd argue, as if the biological tie should automatically override the years of hurt and betrayal. But Dad was stubborn, and his decision was final. He didn't want her there, and that was that. It's weird. You know how illness can change a person. Dad, once the most forgiving soul, had become hardened, more cynical. It wasn't just the cancer eating away at his body. It was the bitterness, the unresolved anger. We all felt it, a heavy cloud hanging over the house, making those last few months even more strained. Sarah, for her part, didn't push too hard. Maybe she finally understood the depth of Dad's feelings. Or maybe she was protecting herself from further rejection. She sent cards, called occasionally, always checking in with me or my other siblings to see how he was doing. But she never came to visit, not once. Then, as Dad's days became numbered, the reality of losing him hit us all like a ton of bricks. I found myself torn, wanting to honor his wishes, but also wishing for a Hollywood-style reunion where everything was magically resolved. Real life isn't like the movies, though. There are no neat endings, no perfect resolutions where everyone hugs and forgives just before the credits roll. I spent a lot of time with Dad during those last weeks, just sitting with him, sometimes talking, sometimes just watching old westerns on TV. He loved those. In those quiet moments, I'd sometimes bring up Sarah tentatively testing the waters, but he'd shake his head, shutting down the conversation before it could really start. "Let's just enjoy the movie," he'd say, and I'd let it go, knowing this was not a battle I could win. Dad's health started to decline rapidly earlier this year, and with it, any hope of reconciling with Sarah seemed to slip away to the man who had once been larger than life. He was no longer the same person who was always the first to laugh or offer consolation. Dad was suffering from pancreatic cancer, which is an extremely deadly disease. One of the most difficult things our family has ever had to go through was probably watching him struggle through treatment after treatment with no genuine chance of recovery. Sarah's attempts to rekindle her relationship felt desperate and, to some of us, a little false during this whole ordeal. Perhaps that isn't fair. It was probably too little, too late for Dad, but she did have regrets, and maybe she was being sincere when she reached out. The pain she felt from picking John over him at the wedding was too great. That was a closed chapter in his life, and no amount of begging or Sarah's excuses could bring it back open. Why this time? Dad would sigh every time her name was mentioned. That's all she's feeling is guilt. It has nothing to do with me. It's all about her absolving herself. Perhaps he was correct? Or perhaps it was how he dealt with the hurt. In any case, he refused to let her see him, not even when she offered to come over to try to make amends, to be part of his life again. There was a noticeable strain this caused in our family. Some family members believed her father ought to pardon her for allowing her last days to be marred by old grudges. She's still your daughter. They'd argue, as if the biological tie should automatically override the years of hurt and betrayal. But Dad was stubborn, and his decision was final. He didn't want her there, and that was that. It's weird. You know how illness can change a person. Dad, once the most forgiving soul, had become hardened, more cynical. It wasn't just the cancer eating away at his body. It was the bitterness, the unresolved anger. We all felt it, a heavy cloud hanging over the house, making those last few months even more strained. Sarah, for her part, didn't push too hard. Maybe she finally understood the depth of Dad's feelings. Or maybe she was protecting herself from further rejection. She sent cards, called occasionally, always checking in with me or my other siblings to see how he was doing. But she never came to visit, not once. Then, as Dad's days got numbered, the reality of losing him hit us all like a ton of bricks. I found myself torn, wanting to honor his wishes, but also wishing for a Hollywood-style reunion where everything was magically resolved. Real life isn't like the movies, though. There are no neat endings, no perfect resolutions where everyone hugs and forgives just before the credits roll. I spent a lot of time with Dad during those last weeks, just sitting with him, sometimes chatting, sometimes just watching old westerns on TV. He adored those in those peaceful moments. I'd sometimes bring up Sarah tentatively testing the waters, but he'd shake his head, shutting down the conversation before it could really start. "Let's just enjoy the movie," he'd say, and I'd let it go. Knowing this was not a struggle I could win, I'm quite close to my dad, and these last 2 weeks are incredibly challenging for me. How do I get her to give him up? Update 1. A week after I posted the initial post, my dad started getting sicker. His health started decreasing pretty fast, and we lost him exactly 1 month ago. It wasn't pretty. I never thought it would be, but I never knew it would be so devastating. It was in a lot of discomfort. He's been through so much in these last months. As terrible as it was to us, he deserved to rest. He was exhausted. In the end, he was cognizant enough to say his farewell to me and my older brothers. Hearing him saying what he said to me was one of the most painful and beautiful moments of my life. His remarks to me meant a lot. I won't say exactly what he said because I believe it's just too personal. Said farewell to my daughters, 11 months old and 2 years old. It was much like when I was a youngster. He kissed their foreheads, wished them well, and expressed his love for them. It pains me so much that kids are too little to comprehend what occurred, but it was something I will never forget. They continue to inquire about their grandfather, and each time I attempt to inform them that he will not be returning. It appears that they are unaware of that. How am I to blame them anyway? Just 27 years old I am. They genuinely don't understand. My dad and I were meant to have many more years together. Nothing about it seems fair. The worst part, though, was Sarah, my twin sister. Dad passed away before they could speak. I attempted to discuss her with him, but he showed no interest in conversing with her. Her desperation increased, and then all of a sudden he passed away. She was denying what was required of her. His funeral was exquisite. Numerous others related their experiences with him. It was pleasant. For the first time since the evening of her wedding, Sarah saw her father. She also failed to identify him. He was really thin. Dad tended to be a little overweight, the well-known dad bod, but the cancer had caused him to lose a lot of weight. She shed many tears throughout the entire funeral. My uncles had to eject Mom and John from the funeral when they attempted to attend the ceremony. All right, Dad's in fricking Britain once. Dancing as expected as possible. Family was wealthy. Petrochemicals. Thus, we were always extremely wealthy. He gave all of his children, including Sarah, an equal portion of his assets and a little sum of money. He will inherit a sizable trust fund for all of his grandchildren, including Sarah's children, whom she never got to meet. To be honest, I expected it. Money was never something that particularly concerned my dad. All he wanted was for us to be at ease and for his grandchildren to have some means of support. The personal items were the challenging part. He left us everyone, Sarah excluded, a very long letter. It was really private information. He talked to me about our story and my early years in my letter. It was rather pleasant. I think I read the letter 100 times or more, and each and every time I sobbed. Dad loved to take pictures as a hobby. He was a real aficionado, and our family was the main topic of his pictures. Later, when he and my mother got together, it was just my siblings and me. This led to the accumulation of several photos of us as children. He gave each of us a photo album and wrote a few words about the location of each picture. To be honest, I was astonished by us. This must be something he did before he passed away. It was a wonderfully nice farewell present, just like Dad would have given. Sarah never received a letter, and there was nothing on her album, roads in the background of her pictures, and she suffered a mental collapse upon learning about this. She was being eaten alive by her regrets. She was admitted to the hospital and stayed there for a full week, but now she's feeling a little better, becoming slightly better each day. Her spouse and I have a great deal of faith in her ability to heal. She is now eating and sleeping nearly regularly. She still breaks down several times a day at random, but she is improving. That's at least what I'm saying to myself. That brings us to the previous week. We found out that my wife and I are pregnant again. There was no preparation or anything of the sort. Last month, my wife went off birth control, and she goes for a week without taking the pill. We haven't told anyone yet because it's still very early in her pregnancy. The issue is that I'm furious. I'm upset that my future child will never get to meet their father. I'm really mad at you. It doesn't seem fair at all, to be honest. I'm terrified and I'm angry. Dad was meant to be my mentor during the entire process of becoming a parent. Using my daughters, he was teaching me a great deal. I'm afraid to do this without him now. I'm afraid that I won't treat my kids as well as he did, since my children merit that. Folks, this is it. There is a lot more potential for improvement in this scenario. Every day I imagine the worst-case situation. Unfortunately, nothing is altered by it. To be honest, this is a sad conclusion. Not at all fair, it seems. That's the nature of life. Actually, it's never equitable. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who reached out and offered support throughout the chat, as well as to those who gave me advice. That was a really lonely moment for me. I still am. It has great meaning for me. I'm grateful. Reddit second update. Sarah's father died and she was devastated. She was being consumed by the shame she had been carrying around about how her relationship with her father had ended. She sobbed for weeks, ate very little, and tried to just figure out what to do next. It wasn't easy, but I was doing the best I could to support her. I was coping with my personal loss and fury over the way events transpired. To be honest, with everything else going on, I had no idea how to deal with her collapse. And that's when I realized that perhaps, just maybe, we could begin to pick up the pieces. Our mother gave us a one evening. She gave me a call out of the blue saying she needed to talk. Her speech carried a hint that something wasn't quite right. So, fearing whatever it was she was about to say, I walked over to her apartment. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone as if it had offended her directly. When I arrived, she murmured, "John's been cheating on me," as she raised her weary eyes to me. It was as though the room's air had been drawn out. I was unsure of how to respond or what to say. This was the man she had abandoned her father for, the one who had brought so much suffering to our family, and now he was betraying her as well. She explained to me how she learned. It seemed that she had observed his increased secrecy in recent times, taking calls in the other room while constantly watching his phone. At first, she was reluctant to trust it. Maybe she was just being paranoid, I thought. However, she later discovered that the communication was from a younger woman, complete with late-night flirtatious emojis. Things that make your skin crawl. I miss you. When Mom approached John, she expected him to downplay it, perhaps even offer an apology and ask for forgiveness. But instead he simply acknowledged it as if it were no big deal. He seems not even remorseful. Said something like things happen and their relationship wasn't the same as before, kind of brushing it off. That was the kind of answer that showed you how little he genuinely thought about anyone but himself. Mom was inconsolable. She immediately told him that she wanted a divorce. John made no attempt to resist it, made no attempt to keep their marriage intact. He simply nodded. It seemed as if he was glad she was the one making the choice. It ended just as swiftly as it had begun. I had a strange mixture of feelings when I heard my mother say all of this. On the one hand, I was upset with John for being such a jerk and harming my mother in that manner. However, there was also a perverted sense of justice in it. I couldn't help but feel a bit relieved that he was finally receiving what he deserved, a taste of his own medicine. The big surprise, though, was when Sarah realized how close she had been to John, and how she had almost chosen him over her father. And this is it now. Sarah broke down totally as her mother informed her that it was like watching someone's entire existence fall apart in front of them. She insisted that she was shocked that she had stood up for him, that she had rejected her father in favor of this man who was, as everyone had warned her, just as awful. Sarah's feelings of guilt surged. She began to mentally relive everything. Everything felt so pointless now. The way she'd handled Dad, the things she'd said, the choices she'd made. Such a fool. She felt enraged. More than anything, though, she was devastated. In the worst way conceivable, the person she thought she could trust had deceived her. And it broke her. She went to stay with a friend after leaving the home that she and John had shared. Honestly, I couldn't blame her for not wanting to be around him. It seemed as though all of her pleasant memories of him were tarnished. All the good things he'd ever stated had come to pass as lies. Mom, on the other hand, was tackling her own mess. The divorce was not pretty. Even though he was the one who had cheated, John made an effort to gain as much as he could from it. Arguments arose concerning money, property, and everything. It was like to witnessing a train accident occur slowly while being powerless to stop it. The most distressing aspect was observing Sarah's reaction to everything. This merely made her much more vulnerable than she was before her father's death. She cut off communication with nearly everyone. She closed herself off to reality. She wouldn't have it when I tried to reach out and support her. She insisted that she needed more time to come to her own conclusions. It was difficult to watch. Sarah had always been the one with the strength, the one who pursued her goals after realizing what she desired. She was lost now, though, and I had no idea how to help her get back. She would not stop talking about how much she regretted everything and wanted she could take it all back and change everything. That was not conceivable, though, as we both knew, as though this was all unnecessary. The family was being torn apart by the aftermath of the divorce. Mom was relying more and more on me, requiring assistance with legal matters, with the resulting mental damage. It was difficult, even though I really wanted to be there for her. I couldn't get rid of the thought that if she hadn't broken up with her father in the first place, all of this could have been prevented. What's done is done, though, and now it's up to us all to pick up the pieces. The family was divided in two. Mother was viewed by some as the victim in this whole situation, that John has never been good for anything. The fact that she had started this whole situation by dumping Dad in the first place was too much for others to bear. Family get-togethers became extremely uncomfortable as a result, with everyone picking sides and blaming one another. Then there was Sarah, sucked up in the thick of things. She was upset with her mother for not realizing John's true nature sooner. She was upset with herself for not paying attention to all of the warning signs. She was depressed, though, more than anything else. She was upset that she had lost so much and had turned away the one person who had always supported her, Papa. From here, I'm not sure where we should go. I doubt that the family will ever be able to move past its sense of brokenness. Sarah is obviously having difficulty as she works to put her life back together. She is attempting to resolve everything in therapy, but the journey ahead will be protracted. As well, Mom. She is, after all, attempting to pick up the pieces. But since she started the whole thing, it's difficult to feel sorry for her. For my part, I'm just attempting to maintain composure. I want to make sure that my own family, which consists of my own children, is not distracted by all this drama. However, it's difficult. I see the sister I used to know, one who was so vibrant and ambitious, every time I gaze at Sarah. I also worry if she will ever return to that persona. That's our current situation. No simple answers, no happy ends. Just a family that has been shattered and is attempting to decide how to move on. Too many times. It isn't attractive. Furthermore, it's not at all what I had in mind for us, but it's the reality we're living in, thanks to everyone who's been there with advice and support. It means more than you realize, especially on the days when it feels like everything's falling apart. Here's hoping we can find some kind of peace in all of this, even if it's a long way off. And as I watched all this unfold, I wondered if there would ever be a way back for Sarah and Dad. Or if certain choices once made left scars too deep to ever fully heal.